Good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining me in the session on creating an effective EDI strategy. I'm Jo Foster. I am the founder of Foster Diversity and I'm absolutely thrilled to be delivering this for you today. This is actually a very short session compared to what we usually do, but obviously this is just a taster. And however, you will be able to walk away with some tangibles and some actions and tips and hints that you can actually use in your organisation today, as some of these things are fairly general. So this is really a great starting point. If you're anything like me, you thought one day in your role, actually, we need an equality, diversity and inclusion strategy to tie everything that we're doing together and to demonstrate our commitment in EDI, and or somebody has approached you to do that, which is absolutely fantastic, but it can be quite overwhelming, quite daunting when you're asked to do that, particularly if you're working in a complex organisational structure or EDI is being positioned to align to that complex structure. And what I mean by that is looking at it from not just looking at it from an internal perspective, so maybe just recruitment and the culture of the organisation, and maybe within that some of the policies and processes that you develop or edit, and then potentially having a framework around that. That in itself is a huge piece of work, just the internal aspect and making sure that everybody feels heard and that the organisation is seen as a great place to work. But that's essentially just one aspect of it. It might be that you're looking at it from an external point of view as well. So if you are a charity or a membership body or an organisation with customers, you might want to consider what that looks like from an external standpoint. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but also what adds to that complexity is you've got internal, you've got external, you may have an international aspect. Is that something that you need to consider as well? Is your equality, diversity, inclusion strategy being used to address a societal issue? So, for example, it could be looking at the skills shortage in particular sectors. So, and on top of that, which makes it even more complicated sometimes, is okay, we figured out, how we're going to go and do this and drive this forward, but we really need to make sure that the organisation, everybody is taking responsibility for this. Then maybe you need to develop a separate framework that encapsulates all of that work around the strategy to make sure that everybody is doing their bit to uphold it and contribute to it. So it can be quite daunting, and that was definitely my experience, was working for an organisation, was that being asked to create an EDI strategy from scratch. Well, first of all, I'm thinking, well, I've never written a strategy before. I've got absolutely no idea what I'm doing there. But the saving grace was that I had worked in that organisation for 6 or 7 years at the time of being asked to write it. And I had insights into the company and how they work and what we'd already been working on in terms of diversity and inclusion. And I'd also been, so I had the company background, those 6 or 7 years, and I'd been working in the D&I space for the same amount of time. So that really helped me, but it did take quite a lot of time to actually get that off the ground, a good couple of months to actually really consider what we needed and get it signed off and approved by our directors and board of trustees and council at the time. Now, this session is not just aimed at charities, but I'm just giving you a bit of an idea there. So I think that this is a great starting point. If one, you've been in EDI for a very short period of time, or if you've been in your organisation for a short period of time as well, because you're not necessarily going to have those insights. So this will give you some kind of framework for where you can start working. But even if you are fairly established, it might be that actually you just want a few pointers on what you might be looking at. So this is very helpful as well. I don't think that this session will be more than half an hour. We usually do longer ones, but as I said, this is a bit of a taster. But anyway, thrilled to be here and to be delivering this presentation for you. So let's just move to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit of background, so my name's Jo Foster. I am the founder of Foster Diversity. I'm a co-founder of International Diversity Day. I'm the Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. I was basically recognised for my efforts around equality, diversity and inclusion. And I have 12 years plus experience working in EDI. And I used to support another organisation as a non-exec director, focusing on diversity as well. And actually, this is something it's very important to me. I absolutely love working in this space because you can really make changes when you implement things correctly. And I think that's something that I want to get across is this is something that I thoroughly enjoy, and I've seen some really fantastic results in that 12 plus years based on making very small changes. And diversity and inclusion is also something that impacts absolutely everybody. It's not about being woke. It's absolutely nothing to do with that. There is a huge difference. And I think sometimes diversity and inclusion can get a bit of a bad rap for that. So yeah, I love what I do, and I've really been able to make changes to lots of different people's lives and initiatives just by making a few simple changes. And some of these things are very simple to make. So these might be some of the things you want to consider in your strategy. So giving you a little bit of background about me, Foster Diversity is essentially a diversity inclusion consultancy, and we do provide bespoke consultancy based on the organisation's needs. We do run training and awareness workshops such as this, but obviously more in-depth or longer versions, so maybe an hour and a half, depending on what the organisation needs, possibly longer than that. And they are usually very interactive, so it wouldn't just be me talking at you for the whole time. We run listening circles as well, so the idea of that is just to get input from colleagues on a particular issue to see what it is that they might be interested in, or and then from there gathering a list of recommendations that we would then provide for that organisation to implement. We are also able to run inclusive leadership training as well, and we would also make sure that we have, interviews and focus groups with different individuals to make sure that that training can be tailored to the feedback from the organisation. And then obviously there's the standard sort of things such as policy and process review, and of course strategy, which we're here to talk about today. Before we get started, just to let you know that we do have a number of free sessions always available. As I said, this is something that's I'm very passionate about, and also I remember working on a strategy at the very beginning and really not knowing where to start, and it can, like I said before, it can be quite daunting. So I like to run free sessions to, one, it helps me keep up to date with lots of different topics, but it also provides people with something that they can actually take away. So of course they're not going to be in as much detail as the main sessions, but you'll at least get a little bit of an idea of the support that you might need. So something new that we have is called Foster Dynamic Discussions, and that's all about getting different organisations together, different representatives from those organisations in a virtual room to discuss any challenges that they have in the diversity space, the support that they are looking for or that others might be able to provide to them because they've been in a similar situation, to share knowledge and insights and just really be sort of maybe a sounding board for things that they've got planned in the future. So those are all free. They're about an hour. We don't really have more than 25 people in a room when we're doing things like that, and everything's confidential. So, but it's very, very useful. We've got, at the time of recording this, we've got Psychological Safety at Work coming up as a free online event, Unconscious Bias, which can be quite contentious, but in my opinion, if you align it to every step of the process, it is absolutely necessary, and it can provide tremendous results. So we do run courses on that. And then International Diversity Day, which I'll talk about in a little while. If you are interested in finding out more, please do subscribe to our newsletter by going to www.foster-diversity.com. So International Diversity Day is, I'm a co-founder on this initiative, and you can go to the website, it's internationaldiversityday.com, to find out more information. But essentially what this campaign and theme is around is well-being, mental health and psychological safety in the workplace, without explicitly saying that. It's all about organisations encouraging staff and colleagues to write a positive, uplifting note to a colleague and giving it to them to read. And that might sound quite simplistic in a way, but actually I think it's something that really moves people. You've probably seen those fantastic YouTube videos out there and Instagram and TikTok videos and snippets where a person will go up to a stranger, a random person, and hand them a handwritten note, and then they'll secretly be recorded in the background. And the reaction is just, it's absolutely priceless. And I think it's something that a lot of people need, just to hear in that moment, no matter what it is, something positive and uplifting can almost relate to any situation. And I think the key point or reason for doing something like this is I think it can be very powerful, because it moves people, and you never know what people are going through. So that's really what this initiative is about. But do go to the website and find out more about it. I'm ultra excited about it. I think it could work really well. It's free to get involved, just requires some sharing of those pictures and the notes on social media. So do get involved. Right, now, thank you so much. If you've gotten through that section, we're now ready to start on creating an effective EDI strategy. So first of all, what is an EDI strategy? Well, essentially, it's a plan implemented by an organisation to promote and embrace EDI. It involves creating policies, procedures, practices, and initiatives that positively impact upon the workforce, regardless of their background. But it's not just about the workforce. Obviously, in some cases it will be, but as I mentioned before, if you're working across a bit more of a complex organisational structure, you're going to want to consider internal, external, the international aspect, if there is anything there. Is your strategy being used to address a societal issue? So again, it really does depend on the organisation, and of course the resources as well. So a good EDI strategy also includes various components. So why is it important? And I'm sure you're all aware of why it's important and what you need it for, what your company why they might be asking you to create this at the moment. But obviously fair outcomes, equal professional opportunity for everybody, essentially, whether that be opportunities to take on more projects, to do to gain a bit more of a professional standing, or if it's, preparing somebody for that promotion or that pay rise, but also looking at that from the recruitment point of view at the time when they join the organisation as well, and how those processes are done fairly and what those outcomes will be. Direction and focus. Of course, you have to have that. You need to know what it is that you're trying to achieve and how you're going to get there. And having that, I think it is incredibly key, because if we loop back to the bottom left, it actually helps to demonstrate that and ensure that efforts are aligned. So that's incredibly important. There's nothing worse than if you're working on EDI in general, and you've got different individuals or different pockets of an organisation working on specific things to uphold and support it, but then you've got other areas of the business that are doing absolutely nothing in that space. So hence me mentioning a framework at the beginning, which can help to tie all of this together. So if you've got that direction and that focus, then your efforts are aligned as well. It can really be a fantastic competitive advantage, even if you're looking at it just simply from a workplace perspective, a workforce perspective. You can be seen as an employer of choice because you've got inclusive practices. It might encourage different types of people to work at your organisation. You are seen as a bit more of a thought leader in that particular space. And I think going on to the next point, it definitely enhances innovation because it sparks creativity and gets people talking. And obviously, as long as you've created those safe spaces that people feel that they can contribute and be heard, then it certainly enhances innovation. And that's been my experience of working on a strategy, because essentially one of the things that you probably want to do is make sure that your culture is inclusive. And even if you just start there, it makes a huge difference. So our framework, this is very, very general, and this is not everything. As I mentioned, this is a very condensed version of what we would offer. But this is a really good starting position for any organisation, because I would imagine that if you look at assessment, for example, you're always going to want to start there and assess the current situation or the current standing of your organisation before you can then start to make plans or to set the clear objectives and goals, as I mentioned there in the yellow. You want to be able to develop a comprehensive plan that obviously makes sense and is quite general to most organisations, just so that you know exactly what it is that you're hoping to do that will actually translate to positive, impactful, meaningful results in terms of your strategy. You want to make sure that you've got that senior leadership support. I know we hear this a lot, and it's quite a standard thing to say, but if you don't have that support, you're going to get a lot of questions and people aren't going to really understand why you're doing this. And you want to have that. You want to have exec sponsorship. You want to have the support of your CEO. And if you're a charity, your board as well. So make sure that that's something that you look at. And of course, monitoring and measuring progress. That's the whole point of this. There's no point just putting an initiative out there and not measuring the progress, because in doing that, you can then adapt it as time goes on. And speaking of adapting, we've got that central part in the middle of this circle here that says evolve. That's really all about making sure that you review your strategy every 6 to 12 months, just to make sure that everything is working as it should do. You might want to go back and look at it and think, well, we tried this way, that's not working, let's try something different. Or the opposite of that, we tried this is working, it's fantastic, let's continue, what else can we do? So really, really key. So in terms of the scope, as I mentioned, depending on your organisation, is going to depend on the scope. And actually here, you may well identify other points that would be helpful for your company, but at least have a look and a consideration at some of these things, because it can be quite a lot. And it's easy for somebody to say, just go and write a strategy. But if you're fairly new to a company, like I said, you might just need a few more pointers. So depending, if we look at the internal external focus, so depending on your organisation, and particularly if you work for a charity where you've got stakeholders that you provide a membership, for example, your strategy is probably likely to have an internal and external focus. But again, this does depend on the resource that you have. If you've got one member of staff, it is possible, but that does make it difficult, and it makes it progress a lot slower. But you can remedy that. So if there's a resource issue, you can remedy it through things like employee networks and EDI committees that are staff-led, and get people to take responsibility for that as well, and also a framework that we'll revisit shortly. So just picking back up on that. So you may want to consider, if you're looking at it from an external perspective, for example, some of the events that you hold in terms of the makeup of the speakers, the panel, the host, the audience, and make sure that you put planning into the strategy that's going to support that. So when I worked for an engineering institution a few years ago, and obviously we wanted to look at the workforce when it came to our strategy, but we also wanted to look at the wider community, the engineering sector, and there was an international element there as well. So that's quite a tall order as it is. But then on top of that, we were looking at addressing the UK engineering skills shortage, and the lack of women in engineering, and the lack of minorities in engineering in general, whether that's somebody with a disability or the LGBTQ plus community. So that was, as I mentioned, quite a lot to take on board there. So and again, that's what I mean by the complex organisational structure. You're looking at it from so many different facets and perspectives that there's quite a lot to consider. So that might be something that you want to look at. In terms of organisational, you always want to assess the EDI needs of your organisation. And this might include looking at things like reviewing the current demographic of the workforce, the makeup of leadership positions, and how well represented different characteristics are across the organisation. And also consider the location of your organisation. So, for example, if you're London-based, London's a fairly diverse city, so it does seem quite unusual if you don't have much diversity dispersed throughout the organisation at different levels, just like any other major city. But you may want to consider, why that representation is low, if that is the case. But also, it's not just about the diversity. That's fantastic, but where is that diversity? If that's at the lower levels of the organisation, that could indicate that there's a little bit of a problem. Maybe you want to look at why that is, and then implement that into the strategy. If you've only got certain cohorts at the top, again, look at what you might want to do, because one of the things you want to do, if your organisation is talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion, it's really important that your company role models that behaviour and can demonstrate it internally as well. And that's not about hiring people just because of a characteristic, absolutely not. Because potentially you're setting them up for failure further down the line if they are not the right candidate. But this is all about making sure that everybody's got an opportunity, whether you're, and depending on who you might go to for those job roles, if you're using an agency, find out how they recruit people. So it's all about, it's great that your company wants to do something, but is their own house in order to, or are they at least making steps towards making sure that they are? That takes me to recruitment. So this could mean focusing on strategies that attract and allow you to retain diverse talent. You could do this by including a review of job descriptions in your strategy and making sure that they're inclusive, implementing diverse recruitment strategies, having an inclusive interview panel and processes, and develop partnerships with organisations such as recruitment agencies, as I mentioned, because there's plenty of them out there that are sort of really jumping on board with the diversity aspect as well, but at the same time hiring people based on merit, not just their character, not because of their characteristics. Workplace culture, this might be another element, another strand to your diversity strategy. So you might want to look at the overall culture of your organisation to ensure that it is inclusive and welcoming to everybody. And obviously this is something that I would imagine most companies want to do. I mean, if you look at things like Glassdoor, which is essentially a review of an experience of an employee working at a company, a lot of people are looking at that before they consider working at different organisations. So it's really important. If you've got someone that's left that's maybe disgruntled when it comes to diversity and inclusion, you know, it's likely that they're going to leave a bit of a negative review. So really a good thing to consider there. And also within that, so within the workplace culture, look at providing EDI training for all staff, so that you can potentially promote those individuals as well. In terms of their knowledge in this space, it's incredibly important, and also helping them to share that responsibility. Also the values of the organisation, you know, most organisations have a values statement around being open and having respectful communication. You might want to use this strand to set up employee resource groups, challenge behaviours that go against the ethos, and addressing issues of bias and discrimination very quickly. So those might be some of the things that come into play when you're considering workplace culture in your strategy. The next thing that we've got is employee development and training. So consider a development programme, or consider developing programmes and initiatives that support the professional growth of an individual and their career advancement, because that's something that's really key. We had that at a previous organisation I'd worked for, where women didn't feel as though they had routes to progression. And actually when it came to the gender pay gap, I don't think we fared very well in this particular company. This was a few years ago now, so that's probably definitely changed, because they had lots of processes in place to make sure that was looked at. But if you create potentially a network for women to get that feedback, to find out what it is that they're looking for in terms of progression, what maybe they feel has hindered them, that can work wonders. You can get senior leaders to maybe serve as mentors, provide training, again, listening circles, and find out which colleagues express an interest in maybe having some more challenging assignments so that they can maybe get that recognition, enhance their own professional standing. And also look at leadership development programs for people as well. Whilst it can be difficult for people to progress, there's not always somewhere for people to progress to. It doesn't always have to be in your organisation. Development means, you know, somebody else maybe being successful in another role. Of course, you don't want to lose staff. You want to retain them, but at least if they're going to leave, let them have the knowledge and the experience so that they can progress. But ideally, you want to retain them and hopefully create those opportunities for them. Supplier and vendor diversity. Now, this may or may not be something that you would consider, but I think it's something that's quite important. You might want to look at strategies that take the diversity of your supply chain into account. And this can be achieved by partnering with diverse suppliers or vendors, helping to create economic opportunities, and also enhance the reputation of your organisation as well. And again, it gives you an opportunity to really set yourself up as a thought leader and demonstrate that you're really thinking about this from the ground up. As I mentioned before, this is not about ticking boxes. Organisations really want to demonstrate that they're doing something in this space, and a great way to do that is by making sure you've got things in your own processes that really align to that. And people will check on that kind of thing as well. Community engagement. So this is really about considering whether or not there are opportunities for your organisation to engage with and support diverse communities. Now, this might be more tailored towards councils or charities where they have a lot of outreach and engagement, but it could also apply to other companies as well. So it might look like volunteering opportunities. Lots of companies nowadays offer a certain number of hours or days off on top of annual leave to take part in volunteering opportunities under the name of the organisation. Companies might want to look at becoming a strategic partner. So partnering with a company that's maybe a special interest group or something like that aligns to the work that you're doing. And you could also look at sponsoring events and initiatives that address social inequalities and those that support diversity. So again, just another consideration that you might want to look at in terms of your strategy. And of course, measurement and accountability, absolutely key. You want to really be able to track what it is that you're doing and make sure that it's actually counting towards something. So that you can demonstrate that in reports, in feedback on social media, in meetings, to whoever it is that needs that information. It's really important to establish clear metrics and goals so that you can measure the progress and the effectiveness of your strategy. You really want to ensure that you regularly assess and report on data that relates to diversity, such as representation, employee satisfaction, and the rate of advancement. But you can select things that are more tailored towards your organisation. And duration, as I mentioned before, you tend to have maybe 3 to 5 years for a good strategy, sometimes less, and that's absolutely fine. But it doesn't just stop there when those 3 to 5 years is up. You want to continually adjust that. So having a strategy for this length of time, I think it really demonstrates a real commitment and suggests that the company takes equality, diversity, inclusion duties very seriously. But you've got to remember it can take a couple of years for some of these things to come into play. There's a lot of quick wins, absolutely, and they can be fantastic and very impactful, but it can take a few years. So you want to have a few years worth of data so that you can spot trends, look at results, and then start to gather data from a baseline, and then make those changes as time goes on. As I mentioned, you should really be reviewing that strategy every 6 months to a year to make those changes as and where necessary. Once you've done all of this, I think looking at potentially having a framework, so depending, no matter how big your organisation is, even if it is just you managing diversity or if you've got a team of people, really look into having some kind of framework that looks at every single department in your organisation, looks at its processes, and provides suggestions of what needs to be done to make those processes more inclusive and diverse. And that way, that information or that responsibility is shared. And it's not just one person doing it, because that's the thing with diversity and inclusion. Even if you've got that in your title, it's not just you that does all of the work. It's got to be the whole organisation. And of course, that can start in steps. But if you really break that framework down into different departments, you can then start to drill down further and think, well, what would it need to look like? So responsibility, accountability, making sure you know who's responsible for what, who's going to hold certain teams to account. Is it going to be the directors, the heads of those departments? And making sure that after you've started to draft your strategy, first of all, don't be disheartened if you've got many, many iterations. That's actually a really good thing. And that's likely to happen. Once you've got the general idea of the direction you want to go in, share that with the departments that you think that's going to be relevant to. So if you've written something on recruitment, for example, make sure that you're sharing that with HR. If you've written something on membership, go to your membership team. If it's customer services, go to customer services team. Because what you don't want to do is necessarily dictate. You want to bring everybody along on this journey with you, and you want people to feel as though they have a say. And not only that, they're going to have insights that you're not going to be privy to, because they're working in those particular areas all of the time. So of course it's a courtesy check, but it's also a way to get some really fantastic insights from people and make sure that they're happy with the direction and they're happy with who the responsibility has been allocated to, and that they will be held accountable. So make sure that that's also in your strategy. So that's it. If you would like to get in contact, please do so. Obviously, it's fosterdiversity.com online, and it's Jo Foster at foster-diversity.com. I hope you can appreciate what I've done with the name there. I had to capitalise on that. But thank you so much for watching this session. And if you are interested in anything else, please don't hesitate to get in contact. And thank you so much.